Hey, Brilund, how's it going, man?
Good. I'm back in Beardy.
Oh yeah, I like it. I mean, we are in official fall weather. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Down in Front Podcast's last call, where we give you some of our thoughts, a bunch of different extra things that we usually don't have the time to kind of record, but we do want to give you kind of an unedited, unfiltered, unspoilered, unsalted versions of our podcast. I will be hanging out with you this evening. My name is Warren, and I have the lovely Brilund, or as you know, the Mouth of the South. What's going on, man?
Hello. It's good to be here this evening.
You know, the one thing I was kind of sad for, complete side note, right as we get into this, is Paul Feinbaum. You know that dude? You remember that dude from like the SEC from ESPN? I fucking hate his guts.
I do not know who that is.
He is like the ESPN lapdog. It's okay if you don't know. I
know Stephen A.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Stephen A. is dope, but like this dude is like the SEC like lapdog. He eats, shits, and breathes SEC. He talks so much shit about all other conferences and has always talked shit about our conference.
Roll Tide.
Well, no. You're not an Alabama fan. Shut up.
No, some of my cousins are though.
Yeah. But he talks a lot. He every time that UCF wins, he's like, "They're going to lose. It's not for real. They're not going to be a thing." And it's like, "Fuck you, bro!" Every time. But anyways, going full circle, his nickname is Mouth of the South, and I hate it.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah. So, I'll bring it up to the group, and we'll talk about maybe changing your nickname. I hope not, though.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only Mouth of the South I knew when growing up was Jimmy Hart from pro wrestling, because not only was he in the WWF, but he was managing wrestling superstars in the Memphis area, and Memphis was like a hotbed for up-and-comer wrestlers before they went to WWF. So we got to see like Ric Flair before he became Ric Flair. We got to see Hulk Hogan before he became Hulk Hogan. Stone Cold before he became Stone Cold. Like all those people came through Memphis before they got to the national, like, big scene.
They were just walking in Memphis, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Bad pun. Damn,
already?
You know how reviled that song is in Memphis?
I can only imagine, bro. I'm going to play so many ridiculous New York songs this weekend. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Speaking of Memphis, it was a heartbreaker last Saturday.
Oh, bro.
Amazing game.
So we were going out.
And I like this rivalry. It's kind of like every single time now it's like, Memphis will get them. And like you see Memphis charging, putting them on their backs. And all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, UCF just comes back.
I mean, last year's finisher for the championship was arguably, I think
that was amazing.
Better. I think it was better because this game started off pretty lopsided and was not very good, at least for us. Like, it was good for you, but it's lopsided, right? Last year, I felt like it was even. It was neck and neck, went to overtime, and it went to the very last play of the game, scoring and ending it. I was like, oh my gosh. But I did enjoy this year. UCF Memphis, I'm sure they're going to play again in the championship, unless Cincinnati makes some noise, but we'll see.
I hope so. Memphis is not as strong this year as they were last year. They've already lost a couple of games, so it would be tough for them to get into that conference championship.
Not really. I mean, it's the American. I think they'll be fine with it. As long as they win out, which they easily can with their schedule. Yeah. I don't think you guys play Cincinnati, but that's the only other team besides USF, and USF is the shittiest, undefeated team in the nation. So I think you'll be good. But Brilund, what we chatting about today?
I wanted to just bring up the whole idea of movies that take space seriously. And do you find them inspirational? What are your favorites? But also because First Man came out, we both saw it. And how do you feel it holds up compared to some of these greats like 2001 or even more recent movies like The Martian or Interstellar? How do you feel that it's comparable to those other movies that take space seriously?
You know, I like when the movies themselves kind of focus on something else and not only on the science, but the science that is there, it is damn accurate, at least to me, who doesn't really know too much about space. And I think the few movies that come to my mind right now are Interstellar, Gravity, The Martian, and First Man are going to be pretty, like, four of the better, more recent space movies. Let me correct myself there. That has come out. And, you know, I think the First Man is going to take a step out just because it is a bit about a biography of, you know, Neil Armstrong's life and everybody in NASA too. Like it really painted a picture of what was happening in that day and age. And again, if you haven't seen any of the movies I just watched and I just actually talked about, you may want to not continue to listen to this because we will be spoiling. So we will give you a disclaimer right now. We do things a little bit differently here in Last Call, but I like that First Man was a biography and it was based on a book, and it really focused a lot on Neil Armstrong's life, his psychological life, his emotional state, his mental state. Focused a lot on his family and his friends and how he was just dealing with stuff. I mean, the movie starts off and basically opens up with his daughter dying from a freaking brain tumor.
Yeah, it's freaking... Just start off sad as hell, Damien Chazelle.
God damn. I was like, The only place you can go is up from that. So, which is so, man, okay, that joke and like you're saying it right there has.
I mean, it's not a joke though. It's the truth of the movie.
Yeah, but it has so much weight. Like the only way is to go up, and they're talking about a movie going in space. I mean, it's great. So definitely not a joke by any means, but I think that it definitely speaks lengths a lot, but. You know, looking at all the other movies, I think, you know, Interstellar definitely focused on, like, space and science. And I don't think they had a story behind it. And I love Interstellar. And there definitely was a lot of story to it. And they had a lot of science into it. You know, what's the science? Yeah, you're not entirely sure. You know, Jonathan and Christopher Nolan's story, you know, and it kind of goes off the rails in the fourth act. But I still loved it. I enjoyed the fourth act a lot. But a lot of people hated that part. So I see that. And then if you see movies like... Gravity, it really kind of bases on just like story and sort of survival. And so I like when the movies kind of don't solely focus on just the actual science, but when they do and they make it comedic, you know, like The Martian, for example, I think is also like very interesting because that was based on a guy that we are learning in the moment of, and he has to basically survive. And if you look at The Martian compared to Gravity, one of them is stuck on a planet trying to survive. One of them's literally stuck floating in space trying to survive. Yeah. And so I like that, you know, each one of these movies are a little bit different. I enjoyed all the movies that I just named and just mentioned, but I do like space and I do like it. I like the fact that it's not like a PSA too, because I definitely felt like Interstellar and Martian and Gravity, the only reason they went up there sort of thing was, you know, talking about like a bit of a space race of why we need it to, whereas this movie kind of talked about his life. It was sprinkling in a bit of the space race, but it was really more focused on his life and less on why we need to go up there, but still painting a picture of what was happening back in the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think First Man's an excellent movie. There are some beefs to have with its storytelling, but I have to say it definitely does a great job balancing what they had to work with and just when you get to space, just trying to capture that infinite and that, I mean, for lack of a better term, beauty of silence and emptiness and openness and possibility, that it does all of that exceptionally well. And I was kind of interested. I was really interested because this was Damien Chazelle directing this, and he's known for movies that are leaning towards musical interest or whole musical itself. And this was like his first like full-on drama where it doesn't really have to rely on music, but he uses music to create the intensity of, like, especially like when Neil Armstrong goes up in the Gemini capsule, when they get into the uncontrollable spin, the music is like freaking you out. It's intense and everything, but also at the same time, just hearing all the creaks and noises of the capsule itself and the openness of space, it's like, oh, they're just in a rickety, horrible, like, death trap. Yeah. And you're right there with them. And it's just like your heart is racing every single time. But there's also a piece to what happens once you break past the atmosphere. You get on the moon. That when you open that door that's making all those sounds from the lunar module, you hear that huge air just get sucked out and then it's silence. I think the whole movie leads up to that one moment where you just hear that silence. You see that clarity of the Earth in the distance, and you see like the stark cleanliness of the moon's surface. You're just like, wow, we did this. And that's an amazing thing. That's one thing I like about First Man compared to something like The Martian or Gravity, is that it's not imagining the possibility. It's not about creating fiction. It's like, let's retell what actually happened. And we did this. We actually got to the moon. And I think it's something where we need to kind of strive to continue that forward progress, because it's definitely worth the investment. I'm glad they spend some time on the Apollo 3 incident where you lost 3 astronauts in the capsule during a test. They all burned alive, and it's like that was a harrowing like loss and tragic. A bunch of husbands and dads were killed. But is it worth the price? And like when you see Neil Armstrong at the press conference for Apollo 11, the first thing he says, like, we like to thank everybody that made it possible for us to be here for this day. And I was like, yeah, that's how you lead that off perfectly. He's like, he knows exactly what the cost of this mission was and why is it important as well. And not only the imagine the possibility importance of let's go to the unknown, but the human importance that we put in a lot of time, we put in a lot of effort, we've done a lot of sacrifices to get to this point.
It's crazy because, you know, you a lot of the things that you talked about, right? Damien Chazelle, for people who aren't quite keen in, like, he shows up on scene and has Whiplash, which is just a phenomenal but like gut-wrenching movie for sure. And then he comes back and has this crazy musical, sort of lighthearted, but still has some undertones of some real life. And
love letter to 50s Hollywood.
Yeah, like smacks you in the face with La La Land, and everybody's like, holy shit. But they still were musically inclined, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. So now he comes with First Man, and I think the sound in this movie, and you mentioned it, but God, like, I wish that this movie was available in Dolby, because really upsetting that it wasn't, but whatever. Maybe
I saw it in IMAX.
Yeah, me too. Like, I think IMAX was like, it definitely needs to be at least IMAX, but the sound design of the metal creaking and expanding, and we're in, like, usually we have a vantage point of the rocket going off, but we don't really know what people see when they're in the rocket, and that's where we are. You just see things like floating past this really small little, like, you're almost helpless. And, you know, talking about the Apollo 3 mission, they were helpless from a fire. They couldn't do anything from the fire from during that plugs test. And so I love the shots. I love some of the scenery. I love the sound that's on here. I love this score. We'll talk about the score hopefully later, but I love this score a lot. And by the same guy, Justin Hurwitz, that did his other 2 movies.
Okay. I was wondering.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and, you know, for everybody listening, like, the only reason I was going to watch this movie, because as you know so far, and if you've just tuned in for the first, I do not watch any trailers. I don't watch posters. I don't even want to know who's in the movie. I don't even want to know what the movie title is. I just want to go there completely blind to a movie. And if you have issues with that, big what? Want to fight about it? And so I was not going to go see First Man. All I knew was First Man. I assumed it was about Neil Armstrong. And I saw Ryan Gosling was in it. And I'm like, nah, I'm okay. I think I'll pass. That's cool. And then you were like, on one of our episodes, you're like, oh, well, it's from the same director from, it's from Damien Chazelle. And I was like, Oh shit! All right, yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go to that movie, and I loved it. Not even for the fact that I'm a big fan of his work, but for the fact that everything that he gave me such a new, different perspective on this movie. That even for the fact that Claire Foy was in this movie, hopefully we'll talk about her in a little bit. But Claire Foy plays Janet Armstrong, his wife, and how much time that was invested in her character, and her character was very much a side character, but still like things that we just don't see. What happens with these astronauts' families, right? Like what happens with people that's on the ground? What happens when people are doing things for so many years, how much death, how death are affecting these characters physically. There's a physical weight with this character. I talked about the mental state of Ryan Gosling's character, Neil Armstrong, the fact that he kept seeing his daughter multiple times throughout the movie. And the movie opens up with his daughter dying, and yet he still see his daughter throughout the entire movie because that's still something that's with him. And I love the fact that when he's being interviewed for the NASA position, he was like, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter. And he's like, was there a question? He's like, well, how's that? Do you think it's going to affect you? He's like, yeah. I can't say that there's not going to be an effect. I love the honesty that was put into place. I really wanted a bit more of that. But I felt like, it definitely went a little bit more of the creative side and kind of melding a lot of different things together and kind of skipping over some things. I think it was just highlighting for the sake of a movie. And I understand that it was a movie, right? But it's like one of these things in which I wish that this movie was like longer and broken up into multiple movies, because that would be great just to see like more of the detail of exactly what they were doing. I wasn't a huge fan of the Buzz Aldrin, or I thought the Buzz Aldrin was a little interesting of a character.
Yeah, Corey Stoll. I mean, he usually plays creepy dudes, and I know they're trying to have him be Buzz Aldrin, who's one of the most infamous astronauts just for being like a shoot from the hip, devil may care type of person. Just like he'll give everybody shit about it. I think his friendships with the astronauts, we really don't dive into it much. We just see them there just to give us the visual of that astronauts are a close-knit group, because it's kind of designed. They're testing how they work and everything. It's very designed around military style. And if you know anything about military living, like who you go to work with is kind of your neighbor in your neighborhood, and the wives do get together. They have meetings. They talk about like what they do with their spouses, what they have like different like cookouts for all the families at one time. It is a very close-knit group of people. And we get a bird's eye view of that in this, which I wish they did dive deeper into what makes one astronaut more fitting for commanding a mission versus the other. They talk a little bit about like some type of competition, saying like Elliot is like the smartest and the best among us, and that's why Neil gets passed over. But Neil just seems to be like, hey, whatever the mission requires. And I mean, he's very much he's not a yes man. He's a very logic driven man. And I think that's a really interesting take on his character. I don't know how much the book actually gets into his persona or his psyche about like how he was feeling about certain things. It makes me more interested to read the book to see what it's all about. But I would say like the big thing that bothered me in this movie was Ryan Gosling. I didn't know if he was. I mean, that's the thing, is just my lack of knowledge is like, did he portray Neil Armstrong the way Neil Armstrong was? Was he a very distant, cold, detached person at this time because of the death of his daughter? It's an interesting thing to explore, but at the same time, I'm just like, I want to see Ryan Gosling do more with this character. And he's really not. He's very, like, stoic. And even when he talks to his children, it's like he's giving a mission debriefing and stuff when he has to leave when Janet forces him to say, hey, you got to sit down and talk with your kids because you got to tell them that you may not come back. And that's definitely a huge point in the movie that is emotionally impactful because you have two young boys here talking to their dad that they don't know if he's going to be back in 10 days or not. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you have a wife that has been his support element, his rock for this family to stay together while he trains and helps with the engineering and building of his missions. And she's there to make sure the family doesn't fall apart. And just shout out to Claire Foy. I think she does the best in this movie. She's amazing. I think she really starts off really cold, and I think that's on purpose because the first 10 minutes of this movie is all about their daughter dying. And we see some very horrific moments like Neil helping Karen throw up in a bucket after chemotherapy and stuff. And yeah, we've seen adults do that like in movies, but we've never seen a child on chemo. And it is tough. It is very tough. And I get it. I understand like how you can get emotionally distant after a child that young dies. And like, will we continue with a family or anything? Or will this move help us or heal us to go from test piloting to astronaut? Is it going to be enough? And they do struggle. I mean, there's nothing like cheating or anything like that. It's more of just like, are they emotionally there for each other? And I think Claire Foy is there to make that become a hard reality for the audience. And she does an exceptional job. I mean, this movie is more about the mannerisms of the characters rather than what they're saying. But Claire Foy gets some amazing moments in this. Yeah. That talk she gives Neil before he has to talk to the boys is awesome. When she confronts the head of Mission Command
Deke.
I call it Capcom because that's what it's called.
Deke, Deke. Played by
but Deke, yeah. Mm-hmm. Coach, what's his name?
I haven't seen that show. Emma keeps bothering me about
neither.
that. I need to watch it though. That's like that's my next up. But
Kyle Chandler.
Yeah, Deke's
yeah, she's good to give him a bunch of crap for turn off the radio for Gemini 8 when they went into trouble that she doesn't know what's going on. But I also like that this movie ends on a very beautiful, quiet moment where you see Neil in quarantine. She's on the other side of the glass, and they just like blow kisses and try to just connect with one another between a pane of glass, which usually you see for prisoners. But this is actually like a hero coming home, and it's like, hey, it can be something where we've been disconnected for all this time, but now we can fully connect. I'm interested also to know, did he really take Karen's bracelet up to space? Was that a real thing? Or was it just for dramatic effect? Because that was a beautiful moment that he's just like, it's time to move on. Even though he went to the moon to do it, mm-hmm. It's like, wow, he actually was able to sneak something onto the ship that could have caused some trouble. Who knows? I mean, just because they're trying to make sure every single part of that ship is working the way it is. Mm-hmm. And then we just see his glove just pull out that bracelet from Karen, and he just lets it go off into space. It was just a beautiful moment.
I love the fact that, I mean, you said so many good things there. I'm not going to like recap all of it, but this final scene between Neil and Janet and the fact that there was no dialogue, and the fact that you also have something, again, we've seen that scene many times in prison, right? But now you flip that scene on its head, and the last time that we saw both of those characters sort of talking to each other was arguing. It was something negative, and he's just basically wasting time so he doesn't have to have that inevitable talk with his sons that he may never see again in his family. And for, them to have that moment that's complete silence. We talked about it a lot of, you go up into space, and once you get up there and they undo the hatch, it's completely silence. And I love how they shot it, because we don't know. I mean, we don't know what it sounds like up there, but they can only imagine and assume, especially with everybody that told them of like, this is what it sounds like when you're up there, which is, you know, absolute peace. And he was able to go up there to kind of have a moment to say, you know what, I am at peace and I need to be able to kind of let this go. The bracelet of Karen and the death of his daughter. To now when he comes back down to earth, reality, right? You go back down to earth, now you have a bit more focus, and now you have this moment of silence with the one person who's always been there for you, the one person that you love, and now you can have that moment of connection without ever saying anything. That you know, and they kind of understand each other. And the beauty and the simplicity of them shooting those two scenes back to back. And I'm really glad that they kind of skipped the coming back to Earth. I'm so glad they skipped that scene because I did not want to watch that. I'm sure there's a lot of things that messed up. Right,
another 10-minute rickety, intense, claustrophobic ride down to Earth.
I was so glad that he kind of skipped that because it was like we've seen that already in the movie. We've seen that a couple times. You know, he opened up the movie like that, and even for the fact that we talked about the science. Going back to your first question, he was bouncing off the atmosphere when there was like first starting, and he couldn't figure out how to basically kind of get back in. I thought that was great. I thought that was crazy.
And that's also amazing that, I mean, they could have said like, oh, he bounced off the atmosphere and lost control. What does it mean to bounce off the atmosphere? Show me that. And it's nuts.
It's terrifying. That's what it is. It's absolutely terrifying. I never want that to happen.
His plane was bent the wrong way when he landed.
Crazy. And then they were like, he's not good enough. So I love the creativity. I love the director's choice and the shots that was used in the closing sequence. Mm-hmm. I loved that there was so much failure in the movie. We see that a lot in, we see that in all the 4 movies I just mentioned, but you see that the failure in dealing with loss back to back to back. And there was a line that, Janet Armstrong, Claire Foy's character, says that they're driving back, as, Jason Clarke's character is driving her back home. And she goes, we were up here and we went through a lot of different funerals. We got really good at, going to those at that point. And then the last one that we went to, and she kind of hesitated and kind of didn't quite finish because we know the last funeral they had went to before this was their daughter. And they were just leaving the funeral from, what was his name?
It was
Elliot. That was Elliot's funeral.
Was it Elliot's funeral? Yeah.
And so we had seen that, it starts off the funeral of Karen, and then we see the funeral of Elliot, and then we go and then fast forward and we see that, Ed and Gus and all of them die. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like on top of how much failure, things that were breaking, things that weren't working, and the absolute most scary, like I think the one thing I can probably be easily afraid of that I think I would never do is, spinning out of control in space with nothing to do, right? Like that's, what else can you do about that?
Yeah, and at the speed that they're spinning, it's just mind blowing. Like when they go into that simulator that's supposed to actually help them actually train to handle like 10 G's of spin that's going on with them, and Neil fails for the first time. He just like wakes up and he goes, "Let's do it again." Yeah. And it's his persistence, I think, that just pays off on who he is as a person, that no matter what happens in his life, it's something that he felt like he needed to do and need to accomplish, just because it's not, I wouldn't say it's solely because of Karen, but that is a big part of it in this movie, is that he needs to just come to terms with Karen not being there physically. But also at the same time, it's like, I got to prove to the rest of the world that it's worth it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge message to send.
that's the tough thing, is because, you know, some things, and, you know, I think looking at him as a hero, it's kind of like that documentary that we had I was thinking of Mr. Rogers, and everybody loves Mr. Rogers a lot. Mm-hmm. But his children sometimes didn't see him as everybody else did, right?
Yeah.
And they loved him, but they saw him differently. Like, Mr. Rogers was a clear father figure. Even me, after, you know, his show stopped, even the reruns of Mr. Rogers still served a purpose. Still serve a purpose. I'm still watching that. I'm at season 5 right now. By the way, I'm still on the binge.
Still on black and white episodes.
Yeah, no. We're in color. We're in color right now.
All right.
But, you know, for them to depict, like, Chazelle directing to depict that Neil Armstrong was flogged. He had some issues mentally. He was kind of unstable. He was kind of absent father, neglectful at sometimes. You know, they showed certain moments that he can connect easily, and then other moments he walks in after crashing the what was the little thing after his crash?
Oh yeah, the lunar lander simulator.
So after he crashes that, he like storms in the house, drinks some iced tea out of the freezer, and like basically storms out. You know, changes his shirt and storms out to go back to work. You know, they show that, you know, shit happens, and clearly people were having to sacrifice for what's important at the actual moment. And I'm glad that, again, talking about the moments of silence and finally things slowing down at the end, I'm glad that they can give that moments in the movie to say, okay, now he can kind of, hopefully he goes back and sees that I can kind of breathe easy for a little bit and kind of focus on, like, being a father. Hopefully, right? But at least I'm glad that they kind of showed that he wasn't always a good dude. And that was the one thing I didn't quite agree with the Buzz, you know, Aldrin character, is I like the fact that the movie kind of dealt with time and failure as, like, the big antagonist. Shit was inevitable. Like, motivation to succeed was the biggest failure, like, and was the biggest antagonist. But the only character that we kind of sort of grew to hate almost was him. And because he was, like, either cold, he was harsh, and I get it. And there's a lot of people that I'm sure at NASA are like that, but they kind of zeroed in and focused on him more so of being arguably, inside the rest of this movie, the second well-known person. Like, people would know if you're talking about, oh, hey, you know about Neil Armstrong? And people's going to be saying, yeah, him and Buzz Aldrin sort of thing. You know, people are going to know those two people. So it's weird that they painted Neil as a bit of a, I guess I would say absent, but still benevolent, good guy, right? The hero.
Yeah.
And Buzz Aldrin's lines and characters, and every time he talked, like literally every time he was saying something, was a bit negative and cold, and it rubbed everybody else in the ensemble that was on the screen like the wrong way. And I was curious as why they focused on that, and us not liking him, or showing us how his demeanor and how he was as a person, and less on what they were actually doing. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, and I think, like, if they were going to start those moments with Buzz, I mean, we got to start to develop Buzz a bit more, and they really don't. And I think that's kind of, I understand the choice, but it's kind of disappointing. We don't get to see more of the team effort behind, or maybe the process of what does it take to build the Apollo mission or the Gemini missions. If you do want to see that, though, The Right Stuff is an amazing movie, and that's the movie you want to see if you want to get more an idea of, like, what the astronaut program was like. This movie definitely pretty much focuses on Neil for 90% of the movie, and I think that might hurt it a little bit, just because I feel that I just still am not sold by Ryan Gosling's performance in this. That he's cold and distant throughout the whole movie and up until the final moment. we do see moments of outrage and emotion. We see him at Karen's funeral where he goes into his office, locks the door, and just breaks out crying, which definitely a very human moment.
Yeah, but even like that one, like even that part, right? I think there's something to say about, again, we talked about the focus on mental health and mental health awareness, and the fact that he's such a sheltered person that he chooses not to share any of that. He
has to distance himself.
Yeah, he lies to everybody and says, "Oh yeah, I'll go play. I'm going to go help your mom," and lock myself in a room and just cry by myself. Whereas, just cry at the funeral, man. Let that out. Let it go. It's okay.
Yeah. Or like he gets upset by the Time magazine's cover. Like first time we ever, I think it's one of the few times we see him get upset by something that the press does. Usually he's able to counteract any negativity from the press with just logic and reason, which is really cool. Mm-hmm. But when he's on the phone with Life magazine and talking about like this article about Gemini, talking about how's the epic failure and stuff, he wants people to focus on what we take away from that epic failure and why it's progress. And I could see where that could piss them off a lot when they decide not to go that way. And that's kind of something when you're in that position, you may have to battle the media to say, like, look, y'all are missing the point of this whole thing. But it is definitely telling, like, kind of Neil, he can't really handle this stuff in a public fashion. He has to close himself away. That's why he slams the door. And then we see Janet tell the boys to go up to bed and stuff, and she just waits for him to finish before confronting him on that. And it's definitely a very interesting moment where it's like the only few moments we see outrage from Neil, which is really interesting.
I think that's a good call out because I don't think that he should get an Oscar nominated at all for his performance, but I think everybody else could, at least a lot of other actor and actresses, like mainly Claire Foy. I think she can definitely get nominated for like supporting cast, right? And I'm sure there's a bunch of other awards, but I don't think Neil being the center needed to be a focus, at least for me when I look at that. And as much as I love Ryan Gosling, we can go back and we can listen to a lot of other podcasts and I'll talk about that dude. Yeah. But I like that he is like the poster person. He is the main character. But because he's so detached, it allows me to then focus on all other things that A, are affecting him, like external sources, and B, things that are happening outside the actual world around him. And I really enjoyed that I can kind of zero in and focus on the fact that, Jason Clarke finally has a character that's not evil. Right? Right. And, and like for sure, we talked about it on I don't think it was actually a podcast, but when we were going
to Pablo Schreiber, he's not evil.
Exactly. I was like, oh, thank God. Thank you for not making them evil. Finally.
I like that he was Jim Lovell. That's really cool, like kind of paying it forward for the future missions.
I thought it was cool. I mean, I liked that although there was a lot of focus on Neil Armstrong being the main character with Ryan Gosling, everybody else has a chance to shine. And I don't think he'd done anything spectacular by any means. I thought he was good. Okay, good. He was fine in his role. But I think what he was doing for everybody else that's what made the movie a bit heightened to me. And I was really excited about that. That I was really pumped. I'm glad they kind of did that. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it wasn't. I'm glad they actually did it because you can put somebody like Neil Gosling. You can put somebody like Ryan Gosling in, and everybody's going to think that, oh, he's going to be acting the shit out of this role. No, he doesn't do that. He kind of like almost to the point where if you take him out of this movie, I think it'd be also pretty interesting to see what it looks like, who else could be casted in it. But I also wonder, this movie is based on a book, not things the other way around of like his actual life. So I'm curious to see, if one of us has a chance to read this book, how closely, just like The Martian, right? I haven't read The Martian yet, but I know that the Martian book is way better than the movie. But I wonder how that will be, how they'll hold up.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to say again, like, besides the music being amazing in this movie, the sound design. When they're getting on board to Gemini 8 and you see the other ship lifting off and the edge, and you just see the walkway they're taking is shaking uncontrollably, and it's just like, are they going to even make it into the capsule to get in here? Every step and every moment is just like a threat of danger for these astronauts, because it is just this highly experimental project that they're trying to do. And when we see nowadays what we're capable of being able to shoot a rocket into space and have it come back, or have the boosters actually land on their own nowadays, and so we can reuse them and have a quick turnover and everything, we've definitely come a long way, and we definitely want to continue to push that progress, even if it's, regardless if it's coming from NASA or the private sector. The more people that are invested into it, the better. But I think this is definitely a love letter to NASA, warts and all, just showing that these were a bunch of really smart people that were trying to do the best they can with what they had, and what they had were like toothpicks and a flashlight, and were able to accomplish amazing things with it. And so I definitely think this movie is worth seeing it just to see this love letter played out, just because you get some amazing, beautiful moments, like just like how in Interstellar, the first time you see like the black hole and everything, and the sound goes away. The moments of silence speak just as much volumes as the moments of intensity and loudness in this movie. And it's really cool to see that one of these space movies is not fictional anymore, that it is a true story, that it is something that happened, regardless of what people on the internet will say. Sorry, folks. The moon landings did happen. It's real.
I love the fact that they also they didn't talk about that.
Yeah, and Damien Chazelle decides to shoot this like it was from the 60s. He grains the camera. He melds real footage from that time with cinematic footage, and it's almost seamless, and it's crazy how good it is. And like, I don't know if you caught it or not, but like that surface of the moon, it was kind of like images from NASA put together and then just smooth out where it looks like he's on a planet. It was just like the actual images of the moon put together, which was amazing.
I did not know that. I do love I loved the movie open, and then as technology got better with NASA, the technology as we were shooting it got better. And I loved that. Right. But I absolutely loved when it was just grainy footage with them hanging out. Like, I think they were like at the pool or at like some sort of like picnic, and it was like super grainy, but it was still Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy there. And I'm like, oh, I think that adds such a layer that you didn't need, but I'm glad he did it.
Yeah.
There's a original song in this movie. I'm curious of get your take in Whitey on the Moon song. How'd you feel about that? You remember?
That's not an original song. That's a song from the 60s.
Is it? No, I thought Leon Bridges wrote that.
Because I've heard that song before.
Really? Ooh, I'm curious now. Hold up. Whitey on. I like how, oh no, it's, okay, first of all, I like how I typed in Whitey and Boulder came up, and I was like, oh no, that's not what I'm talking about.
Can we know your location? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's Gil Scott-Heron.
So, interesting. So, I guess Leon Bridges performed it.
Yeah, but Gil Scott-Heron did it.
I don't know who Gil Scott-Heron is.
He did The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, I think.
Ooh. Man, I need to, yeah, that's him.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Really enjoyed that section of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think from that song alone, in that bit of a montage that talks about this is what you're doing, this is what you're putting a lot of money into. Is it all worth it? Is it all worth it? And there was a question that was like, is it all worth it? Is all this death worth it? You know?
Yeah, and we see some. I mean, I think those are eternal criticisms that we got to confront, and it's never an easy choice. NASA was fully government funded; it was taxpayer money going into it. But we see similar criticisms of SpaceX. Why are they spending all this money to do all this space testing and everything? Why don't they try to build affordable housing or something and something that'll help all people? It is definitely, for that time, it's the 60s, it's the height of the civil rights movement. It's definitely necessary to address that. How much time we spend on it and how much importance we give to it, that's a tough thing to decide. Mm-hmm. It's a great song. It definitely has some poignant moments to it. It comes down to, you make some really good points, but regardless if it's Whitey or anybody else going to the moon, we got to go to the moon. I'm sorry. It is definitely worth it to just show how far humanity can go and what humanity is capable of.
Crazy. All right, lasting thoughts, my friend. Let's close it up. What do you think? Let's grade it. Let's do our old school grades.
Okay.
And let's do some old school grades. We'll kick it at old school. Do some grades and say, what's one movie that you would tell people to go watch before checking out Damien Chazelle's First Man, starring Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy?
Yeah, so I would say one movie to go definitely see before this movie is The Right Stuff. Because it kind of just dovetails into this story of Neil Armstrong. Right Stuff is a fantastic ensemble cast that tells the tale of the birth of the astronaut program in NASA and getting John Glenn into orbit. And this continues that path. I mean, they're great space movies about real things that happened, and I think that is definitely something we need to keep in mind while we go out there. And if there's ever something that feels like, hey, things are bad and terrible, go out there and do your thing, and don't let self-doubt get the better of you. Don't distance yourself. If you have to talk through something, talk about it. Take a risk. Taking a risk you can fail at it. That's definitely something that can happen. It's pretty highly likely too. Or that one time that everything works, it's probably be the biggest payoff ever in your life. So I think First Man is a fantastic movie. Incredible drama. It's kind of like the Star is Born, where you start off with incredible heartbreak, your heart's just ripped out of you in the first 10 minutes, but then you get so much hope by the end of this movie. It's fantastic. I would say the only bad part to it is Ryan Gosling. I just kind of wanted more out of that performance of Neil.
Spoiler alert for Star is Born, by the way. That movie's still in theaters, so be careful, man. Yeah. Be careful. So I'm going to echo off a lot of stuff that you said here. I'm going to start with things that I didn't like about the movie. Buzz Aldrin's character. I think his depiction was a bit too cold and didn't quite care about him too much. I kind of wanted I needed to see more of how death and how these failures are affecting Neil. Instead of him kind of brushing it off, because we see that a lot in today's society of people not really letting it sink in that these things are affecting me. I'm sad, right? I don't really see that. We're not really seeing that. So I kind of want some more. I know that he can do it as Chazelle and Gosling. And so I wanted a bit more on that end. But also, I would also say the length of the movie it definitely feels longer than, at least looking at the timeline. So this movie's 2 hours and 21 minutes.
Yeah.
to talk about a movie about space when not much happens when you get up there, as in like it's a lot of silent moments. I love it being slowed down. I'm just curious. I think the length of the movie may hurt it, so people may not like it about that. I don't mind it. I'm just in general. I think people may not like it. I loved everything about this movie. And I'd say, one movie and taking an opposite approach. If you haven't seen a movie from Damien Chazelle, I wouldn't start with La La Land, and I would take a look at Whiplash. And especially from a lot of the things that Brilund was talking about he really shows these characters that nothing's going to stop me. I'm going to give everything I can to try to kind of get to as close as I can for my goal. And I'm going to do it as hard, if it kills me, as much as possible. We see that a lot in First Man. We see that a lot in La La Land, and we see that a lot, what used to be a lot more in Whiplash. And if you haven't seen that movie starring Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, definitely go check that out, just so that you can get a bit of a style of who Damien Chazelle is as a director. Also, just so that you can get a sense of his storytelling and his visuals and what he likes to do. So definitely go check that out. Also, another thing you can go check out is more of our work at downandfrontpodcast.com, where we're going to be putting a bunch of our podcasts and reviews. Definitely kind of thanks very much for kind of hanging out. We're going to be doing more of these sort of side episodes, last calls. You'll see that we'll be hanging out, just kind of chatting. If you definitely want to be on the show, let us know. You can send us an email at thecrew@downandfrontpodcast.com. Drop us a line, and then we'll get you helped out and get you signed up. Again, I am Warren. I'm going to be signing off and headed out for this evening. Brilund, last words?
The Eagle has landed.
Nice. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Yeah, I want Damien to do